Amazing. And your book is about corner booth to corner office, but is that what, when you meant corner booth, did you mean specifically when you were working in the agency or something else specifically?
No, so the book, Dare to Become from the Corner Booth to the Corner Office, is really about my experience working for our family's business. My parents invested in a restaurant when I was in high school, and I learned really quickly what it meant to work for a family business, but also what it took to run a business. And so I wrote the book really about how those early lessons of work ethic and responsibility, accountability, management, and how I parlayed those experiences to my career when I went into the corporate work environment and ultimately when I started my own firm. So it's an inspirational story. I cover a lot of different topics, things I experienced along the way. But I draw that line between the corner booth at the restaurant and now sitting in the corner office for my own company.
Amazing. And your book, is it more of like a memoir or more of lessons that you've learned and a little bit more information on that?
So it is classified in the business category. It is not a here's how to start your business, but rather it's, hey, if you are going to start your own business, here are the fundamental things that you need to do in order to be successful.
Amazing. Can you tell us about your career path from, like, in this case, the corner booth of your family restaurant to the actual corner booth or corner office in your company? Was there anything in between, or did you just immediately go to college and you're like, ooh, this is something what I want to do, and it just built up from there?
Well, funny story. So when I worked for my parents' restaurant and watching them become entrepreneurs after they had worked in the corporate world for 20 years, I swore to myself that I watched how hard it was for them to build this business. And I swore I would never go into business for myself. I was going to go into journalism. I was going to be a writer. I was never going to touch business. And went to Europe, of course, had the wonderful opportunity of dabbling and learning about the PR in a different language, but realized that I really did want to be in the States closer to my family. So I moved to Philadelphia and I worked at an entrepreneurship institute where I was working with early stage companies that were building business plans, feasibility studies, and starting the process of looking for funding. Did that for a little over 2 years before I was recruited by a venture capital organization who brought me over to run the organization where I was then looking for more mature early stage companies looking for funding between 1 million and 5 million. So even though I swore I would never go into business, it felt like I was surrounded by nothing but business. And after having done that for several years, I met my now husband of 16 years. He lived in Atlanta, so I had to pivot, moved to the South, and essentially the venture capital community at that time, this is, 18 years ago, wasn't as built up as it is in the Northeast. So I really took my experience and became a strategist for interactive agency here in Atlanta. And having done that and gathering some experience there, that's actually what propelled me to start my own business in 2009.
Amazing. And what I was kind of curious about, it's like, what was the reasoning behind why you didn't want to go into your own business? Is it because of the work and the time and all the money that you need to do that?
It's a good question. I feel like at the time, when you're a teenager and you're in college and you want to have fun, you want to go do things with your friends. And I was working, right? I worked spring break, I worked on the weekends. I really felt the responsibility of working for my parents' business. And I took I was very proud of that. And so I do feel like maybe it was burnout just because it was a phenomenal experience, but it was a lot of work. And so I think from that perspective, I wanted nothing to do with it. Yet I do think all roads lead back to that experience because I was able to see what it was like for them to have control over their future, have control over what they wanted for their future. And so once the opportunity presented itself for me to take that leap of faith, I never looked back.
So interesting, because I had a very similar scenario as you. Is like my mom actually worked in journalism and then she ended up going, well, she wasn't in journalism. She was doing like advertisements for newspapers. So kind of this
Sure.
area. And then eventually she opened a gift store in a mall.
Mhm. Yeah.
So she actually always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but because I saw how much work she did, I was like, I don't think I want to do that. But at the same time, I want to eventually start a business. I just didn't want the work that came with it. Now fast forward, I worked in consulting and now I'm at Google and I still have my own business. So
Yeah.
specifically, so one is like my content creation, the other one is my cat sitting. And
Yeah,
that actually takes so much time because on the holidays when I'm off from work, I'm still working.
exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
like a
So you
constant grind.
understand.
Yeah. But I also like could not have it any other way because like you said, I have my own control of my own business, my own hours in some ways too. So it's really cool in that kind of way. But at the same time, I'm like, is when I'm going outside on July 4th, 95 degrees, and I'm going to a client's house, is it really worth it? But at the same time, it is.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it does take a lot of work and effort and energy, but I will say that once I made the decision to go
Yeah.
down this path, I invested in other businesses outside of Junction Creative. And really, when I say I haven't looked back, there wasn't really ever a time where I questioned, should I go back to work for somebody else? It really was, really just looking forward and continuing to build the business that I have.
What specifically made you decide to open your own agency instead of like actually just going to one and become and going up the ranks in that case, like being a CEO or COO in that kind of way? Because I'm pretty sure starting one is a much more work.
Absolutely. I experienced a lot of different cultures and environments that I had worked in. And I do feel like, and I cover this in Dare to Become in a couple of the chapters, I discuss my experiences working inside of some of these agencies. And the culture and the mentality did not align with what I valued and how I valued work. And honestly, the day that I decided to start my business was the day that I walked into work after a particularly challenging time with the team there. And I quit my job, which I don't advocate for others to do, but I had reached a point where I had had enough of this culture that was eat or be eaten. It was the blame game, it was finger pointing. And really, what had happened is I had gotten the swine flu. So imagine it was the early version of COVID, but it had hit the country, and I was sick for 10 days, 103 fever. I only missed 4 days of work, but had to work remotely because my boss at the time wanted me to edit a PowerPoint, and I was deathly ill. And it was a barrage of email after email after email, berating me, telling me that I wasn't getting my work done. And it was really meant to be kind of a power move from his perspective. And I had had a great relationship with the CEO and the other leadership there as well. And the day that I walked into the office and I walked in to see him, I don't know what triggered it, but I couldn't take it anymore. I really had just decided that this was not an environment. I was an incredible employee. I had done, really great work. And I was a really good team player. And I had reached my limit. And so I left. Like I said, I wouldn't advocate go quit your job. But fortunately, I have a husband who has been an entrepreneur longer than I have. And I went home and I told him what happened. And he said, well, what will you do? And I said, I think it's time for me to start my own and create a culture that reflects what I have been looking for the last 10 years and couldn't find. And so I put pen to paper and started my business the next day.
Wow, that's definitely a lot of courage that took for you to do that, especially if it was something that you probably didn't expect to do or plan to do. It sounded more of like that switch really triggered this. So when it comes to launching or growing your business, when you put that pen to paper, what exactly were you planning? Was it like a traditional business plan, or were you kind of looking into maybe the clients you were working previously and how to like bring them into your current one? What was that process like specifically?
Yeah, with my background, having worked for an entrepreneurship institute and then having worked for a VC organization, I understood what business plans were. I read enough of them, right? I saw hundreds and if not thousands of business plans and financial models and marketing models. And so I knew the first thing I needed to do was really to write my own business plan. And I put together a list of all the things I needed to create, from developing the business plan, the marketing strategy, putting together a financial outlook, and then all of the small details, getting an LLC, filing for insurance, getting your occupational, tax certificate. There were all of the things that I knew I needed to do. And I put the list down and literally just went one by one down that list until every single thing was taken care of.
Yeah, that's actually the part that I feel a lot of people struggle in, and like specifically Katsuni. I did not do that, but I also had experience with business plans from business school specifically, but I did not do that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you planned a lot and then you executed. So once you were executing it, what were things that you had to navigate or pivot to make sure that it was more competitive? Or especially when you're starting out, there's always something that's coming up that you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. Or like, oh, this changed now. Maybe this is the area to grow. Like, what were those lessons that you had?
Absolutely. I mean, in the beginning, right, you're doing everything from, putting together the business cards, putting together a website. I had a friend who had already started his agency many years before mine. He gave me my very first website so that I had a shingle to hang out. And remember, this was 2009. So this was before Facebook and social was as big as what it is today. So I really focused on getting that done. And then I literally worked my network. I was very fortunate in my career that I was working with high level business owners and executives in various industries for years. And so I started calling those folks in my network to see if they were looking for an agency or just to let them know what I was doing in case they needed me down the road. I was reaching out to people locally to tell them what I was doing. I did not reach out to previous clients at agencies I worked for because that wouldn't have been a great way to start. But I was lucky that I developed some great relationships with friends that I had worked or people I had worked with who had already started their agencies as well. So that gave me an early start to getting some referrals and getting some small clients in that first year. But I will say from day to day, it was everything from sales and marketing to meetings to making sure my bank was balanced, right? So it was all of the things.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of entrepreneurs, usually the first thing they come across is like as you scale, you need to also scale your employees. Or maybe like right now you've been doing, well, at least back then, you were doing everything yourself. What was that point where, and how would you approach this when you're like, okay, I can't do this all by myself. I need to hire employees. I need to hire a team specifically that you would trust. What was that process like? Because I feel like this is the part where it usually makes or breaks a business.
It does, right? I mean, success is in the details. It's the execution of the work. I was fortunate when we hit 18 months in business, I was introduced to a stakeholder at Yahoo. We actually brought on $1 million client literally overnight. So I went from it being myself and two or three contract folks that I'd worked with for a couple of years prior. Um, to having to hire a full staff. So, what I will tell you is it's very difficult to manage. And I will say my advice to folks as you are bringing on employees is that even though it's exciting that you've got all of this revenue coming in, it's really, really important to make sure that you have visibility on someone's role or position for 6 months to a year in front of you. You don't hire because you're busy today, you hire because you have a need 6 months to a year out. And I do think that that's a good rule of thumb when pulling in a full time employee. Obviously, in today's environment, there's Upwork, there's contractors that you can loop in, and those are great resources to help you when you aren't ready to hire a full-time employee. But remember that when you bring them on, it isn't just paying their salary, it's the taxes, the payroll taxes, the benefits. And so, like I said, I always tell folks, don't just hire shotgun style. You definitely want to be methodical in when you bring them in and when you see a need, because the business can ebb and flow throughout the year. So you just have to be mindful of that.
Amazing. And does your book actually cover this portion of it of like staffing and finding a team?
It does. So it covers literally, I tell the story from start all the way to exit, right? So we talk about what do you need to think about financially? What does that mean, right? What do you need to think about when you're managing a team of people? How do you need to set up, culture and communication? How do you work in a multi-generational work environment? So I cover all of those key themes and areas that are going to be important. And I give tips and tricks at the end of each chapter so that you remember the highlights or the things that you should remember as you're looking at your own business.
So as a woman in your career, and I'm pretty sure this is, especially if you have a family, how was that process like from, in this case, like having a job and then going into entrepreneurship? Because I'm pretty sure, especially with the support of your husband, which actually has experience in entrepreneurship, like how was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's difficult when you go, I think, in general, the mindset when you're working for someone else, you've got that money coming in every month. I will say having a supportive partner and husband was really important. In the early years, he did offer to fund the business, and I said no. Because I really felt like I needed to learn those lessons on my own and have myself stand on my own 2 feet from a business perspective. But I will say that the work-life balance is not what it all shakes up to be. As we've discussed, working can be 10 hours a day. Sometimes it's 12 hours, depending on what the need is. And so in those first 6 years of the business, I was available 24/7 to my clients. And when I was 6 years into my business, I was fortunate enough to have two beautiful baby girls. I had twins. So I literally went from having my own life with my own schedule to having to juggle being a mom for two babies, which I didn't know what I was doing. Continuing to run my company and grow the company and also be a good partner as well. And so I will say it was a delicate balance, but having children forced me to put a schedule in place that was reasonable and that allowed me to spend time with my children and also allowed me to run the company.
That's great. And do you have any advice for anyone that's like an expecting mom that is also in the working community as well, or even someone who wants to get back into work?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be hard, and I'm not going to lie. It was so completely messy, and I am a very organized individual. I had spreadsheets, I had lists. It's never going to go the way that you planned. But being an entrepreneur, that's exactly how it is. It's not predictable from day to day, what's going to happen. So what I will say is give yourself some grace, and realize that. Just because today you're overwhelmed and underwater, whether it's with work or with children, that doesn't mean it's going to be like that tomorrow. And I would say to all of those moms who have, been at home and are looking to re-enter the workforce, I think it's amazing. Moms carry a lot of responsibility. They carry a lot of tasks and things that they have to do. And I have to be honest, I am always so motivated to see those folks go back into the work environment because they've got skill sets too, right? Just because they took time off doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of great knowledge to share in work environments. So I would encourage them to go back when they're ready. And likewise, too, if you are a business owner and you have a family and you find that it's hard to juggle both, work on your schedule. Do what you think is achievable, what you feel you can live with, and just know that it's not permanent. Those kids will get older and you'll have more time. It's not one, it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Yeah, that's actually something that I've heard in a lot of panels. It's like it's not about work-life balance. Sometimes it's like work-life integration and
Correct.
making that work.
No, it's actually a great term. I hear this work-life balance, and I will tell you there's nothing balanced about it. If you are with your children, you are choosing your children over work. When you are with or at the office, you are choosing work over another option. And so that's why I say to folks, give yourself grace. I tell some stories in the book about how I missed my daughter's recital. I got there 30 minutes late. It was on my schedule. I could have gotten there on time, and for some reason I didn't. And when those moments happen, you just have to forgive yourself and give yourself permission to not be perfect. And the kids will eventually forget that little disappointment. But it is about giving yourself grace.